Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. First of all, I wanted to start with reminding everyone we had our 10-year celebration a few weeks ago, which was a really good time together that we spent together. And we made some shirts, and then some people wanted to get the shirts, so we're asking if you want a shirt, let us know, and then we'll order them in about a week or so, I think. So Carol shared something in our WhatsApp group for you to fill out a form if you want more shirts, and it's this one here, and there are you can change the wording here. There's a couple options, and we see Bruno and some others wearing it as well. So that was just a quick reminder to help out Carol. And also, we're trialing something. Thank you, Bruno, for bringing this up. We're trialing
Calling help desk here.
We're trialing an app today that does simultaneous translation. So I'm here speaking to my phone in English, and then whoever joins this little session can have this translated to Portuguese or any other language. So hopefully it works out, and it's a very easy setup. So if it works out, I think it'll be a good solution when we change our languages here on Sundays. I'm excited to try this out. I had never seen this app before, so and it's picking up everything I'm saying, so hopefully it works. And we can also, like when we do Portuguese sessions, we could also use this and translate it to English. Perfect. Okay. Oh, I forgot to grab my little text here. Sorry. Okay. So we're going to start with a little text, random text from the book The Way, the Truth, and the Life by Chico Xavier through the Spirit Emmanuel, just to help us calm ourselves down and relax our hearts. So the text is called In Caesar's Household, and it interprets a passage from Paul to the Philippians when he said, "All the saints greet you, but especially those who are of Caesar's household." So Emmanuel brings this interpretation. He says, "We often hear inappropriate remarks by certain believers with regards to others who have been called to difficult tasks involving money or power. False piety is always ready to criticize the friend who, after accepting a laborious public position, faces more troubles than notes of harmony. A distorted opinion looks at everything maliciously. If the brother or sister in public service is compelled to participate in important social functions, he or she is stigmatized as a traitor to Christ. One has to be very cautious when passing such judgments. In apostolic times, Christians who lived pure lives were called saints. Paul of Tarsus, who was humiliated and persecuted in Rome, had the opportunity to know numerous souls of that type. And what is even more remarkable, he lived with many such disciples who were connected with Caesar's palatial household. Paul receives attention, favors, assistance, and care from them. Writing to the Philippians, Paul made special mention of these friends of Christ. Therefore, do not judge your brothers and sisters by their apparent fortune or political privileges. Before anything else, remember that there were saints in Nero's household. Never forget such a great lesson. So let us start in a quick prayer before we start our talk here. We can close our eyes, take a deep breath, and elevate our thoughts, our feelings to our guardian angels, our mentors, those who take us to Christ. And in doing so, we ask that we may feel the feeling of peace, of love, of serenity today. We also ask you, Master, as we talk about our topic today, we ask you to humble our hearts so we can truly hear what it means and we can apply it in our lives. So we can help heal our hearts. We can help heal our wounds and leave here motivated to transformation, to forgiveness, to healing. We also would like to thank you for all of us that are here today. We're all here for a reason. And we'd like to thank you for influencing and allowing us to be here today. May we all connect through our hearts and attune ourselves to the love of Christ. So be it. Thank you. Louise, it says that you left the session.
I rejoined again.
Okay. So, today, a few months ago, we were talking about a topic, and guilt was a feeling that was brought up throughout that talk. But we didn't have much time to talk about it in a deeper sense. So thought it'd be a good time to bring this and dedicate a whole talk. When I first talked about guilt about 40 years ago, I think I did this in 3 different talks because there's so much to cover. But this time around, I shrunk it a bit into one, and we might be able to get through it. If not, we'll split again into other chats. And just so you know, like the basis of all of this, the bulk of it comes from Joanna de Angelis. So she's written something that we call the psychological series from Joanna de Angelis, where she wrote 16 books that really helps us, and it brings together, it brings together, I would say, psychology and spiritism, basically bringing the psychology and the science from psychology and spiritism together. It kind of blends the two and strengthens both. So we're going to be using a few of her books here, not all 16, but about 4 or so, where she describes guilt in many different ways, just to show us how important it is to talk about, but also she brings us some comfort in how to heal ourselves from it. Also bringing passages from the Gospel of Jesus, from Heaven and Hell, from Allan Kardec, and also bringing some passages from a friend called Alidu Sekirafilhu, who's part of the Federation of the State of Mato Grosso in Brazil. And he's done a bit of a seminar on guilt. So that's another one that we'll bring today. Okay, without further ado, let's start. And I will ask for your help. I will ask for your interaction, for your comments. Starting with, what is it? How do we see guilt? Is that a feeling? Is that a thought? Is it good? Is it bad? How does it feel in our hearts, in our bodies? Do we all have it, or just a few of us? What do you think that that feeling is? And I can start with Joanna, and then we'll dive deeper. So in this book here, which is really good, it's called Existential Conflicts, or Conflitos Existenciais. She brings very short chapters, and it's very direct, very succinct, and very practical as well. So she has one that's called The Psychology of Guilt. So we're going to be using this quite a bit, and she says that guilt is the result of anger that one feels towards oneself, directed inwards when there's a sense that something was done wrong. So here we start to see that what brings about guilt is when we realize that we did something wrong. When we did something wrong, that can generate an anger, a rage within us, and that leads us to feel guilt. That's the feeling of how she describes it. It's this anger, it's this rage when we see that we've did something wrong. And instead of being loving with us, we fall into guilt, which we'll talk more about this. And then if we were to think, where does it come from? Why do we feel this rage or this anger when we do something wrong? Do we all feel that way? And Joanna describes it can come because of many different reasons. First of all, is from our past lives, of something that we did wrong in a past life that's still surfacing in this lifetime. Something that I did in the past and I didn't quite work through it, so it still lingers into this lifetime. The second that she mentions is the idea of whenever we do something wrong, we must be punished. That idea that carries on for thousands of years, that's somewhat ingrained in us. And so Jesus already taught us to do it differently, right? When he said, it was once taught you to hate and fight your enemies, I've come to tell you to love your enemies, right? So 2,000 years ago, he was already telling us that love would be the solution to wrongdoing, yet we still bring this punishment, this hatred and this anger whenever we do something wrong. So it's something that's within us, likely all of us. And then there's also another piece that Joanna talks about that is not necessarily to do with the past, but it's more so on how we were raised. There is an influence as well, depending on how we were raised, that it can spur or it can bring some guilt when we're dealing with something that we did wrong. So there are many, as you can see, there are many things that can bring this about. So it's hard to say that it only affects one or two, but it's something that's pretty ubiquitous around us in this society that we live in today. And then if we were to think, okay, so that's great, we understand a little bit more. And then Alidio, he gives us another definition here, saying that the feeling of guilt is always engraved in the unconscious as a need for punishment, like we said, through which the ego seeks to free itself from the wrongdoing. So this is a little trick that the ego plays with us, that it thinks that if I'm punishing myself, I'm freeing myself from that wrongdoing. Right? So if I punish myself, then I'm okay. And this is what we're going to be talking about quite a bit, because we'll see that punishment, it doesn't heal anything, doesn't make anything right. It's quite the opposite. It's we can't really right a wrong through punishment. We can't really right a wrong through
What's wrong?
So something burning. Yeah. Maybe it's the guilt.
What did you do?
What did I do exactly? Let's not open that can of worms. Yeah, exactly. So we can't really right or wrong by doing something wrong, right? The way or the analogy that we can think about is it's when you have a little kid and that little kid is starting to walk, right? As a father, as a parent, as they're starting to walk and they fall, what the father does or the parent does? It picks themselves up and helps them, right? It won't slap them, it won't punish them because they fell, because they're still learning, right? And that's I'd say a very good analogy for us to understand how love is somewhat the key as opposed to punishment. And we also bring the idea that suffering will help us right or wrong, that if I suffer enough, then I will have repented, and I will have healed what I did in the past. And this is it's a bit of a misconception. I mean, suffering itself doesn't heal. It doesn't right any wrong, right? As we'll see. What frees us from it is love. What frees us from a wrongdoing is realizing what was done wrong and then try our best to make it right. Not through suffering, not through punishment, but through love. And again, the other piece that I've already mentioned is, am I alone in this? No. We're not alone in this. I can probably say that almost all of us somehow have a little bit or a lot of guilt that we carry within us. So it's a topic that I would say is applicable to a lot of us. And then Aliru, he describes to us, how guilt escalates within ourselves. As soon as we feel guilt, how does it, trickle down through our bodies, through our minds, and we have feelings and kind of like the dialogue. Once I show you, you'll understand. He says that the first thing that happens when I do something wrong and I go into guilt, he says that's self-judgment. I was irresponsible. How could I do this? But it's not in a loving way that looks at learning from the mistake, but it's in a judgmental way. How dare you do that? It's kind of like that. What that little shadow is highlighting there. How could you do this in a way that brings anger and rage? And from then, he says, then we go to a self-condemnation state, which is us telling ourselves that I must suffer. Because again, we bring that conception that it is through suffering that I'll get to repent. And this is the piece I think that speaks to most of us, to the importance of this, is that eventually leads us to self-punishment. And self-punishment is the one where we start to get the consequence of that guilt, which is what we call somatization. Can't pronounce it.
Somatization.
Yeah, that. Right? That. Yeah, didn't pick up. And which means it's when it eventually becomes physical, right? It's when that guilt is so ingrained in us that it becomes physical, either physical to our bodies through illness, or through a psychological process of any sort of a psychological, and we'll talk more about this, but something around anxiety or panics or depression, but we'll talk more about this. But it's basically saying that eventually that guilt, if we don't deal with it, eventually it will become some sort of an illness, either physical or mental.
Victor,
Yes.
one question. When it comes to the self-punishment, is it something that we create for ourselves?
Mhm.
Like, it's not something that God did, you know what I mean? Like, it's something that we allow to happen to ourselves because unconsciously, I guess, we choose that? Is that
Yes.
right?
Exactly. And like we said, it's because we think that's the way
To heal.
to heal, right? And hopefully we can change that
and understand what is the path to healing a wrong that I did. And that eventually, as Rena says, it leads to self-pity, which is then, we start to feel like a victim and thinking about, oh, poor me, this is happening to me. Like, once I get those diseases, once it becomes physical, then we go into self-pity, why am I going through this? Why am I suffering? And so this is, as we see, this is how Lidio and Joanna kind of describe the whole aspect of guilt. And like you said, we think it's a movement of responsibility. We think this is the way to right a wrong, but they describe it as a pseudo-responsibility. It might look like it, but it's not. Because this whole movement is driven by feelings that are not virtues. They're driven by our egos, such as rebellion. It's a lack of love towards ourselves. It's heavily ingrained in our idea of perfectionism, that we must be perfect today, right? It's that demand that we have on ourselves. And all of this is driven by pride, because it's us thinking that we should already be at the level of God. I should already be there. When we realize that we're not as big as God, we're quite small, and we're learning, we're in a process, right? But our pride tries to teach us something different. And as we'll see, pride, what would be the virtue that kind of can transform pride? It would be love, right? So, having said all this, then we might start thinking, well, so if we say that it's, it's okay to make mistakes, then, if we do something wrong, it's okay. Then we might start to think, well, but then how do we handle that? How do we control that? Are we just going to be living a life of mistakes and not having any consequences, not learning anything from it? Are we going to become permissive, and just allow all mistakes to happen? And Joanna, she talks about this in the book Love Unbeatable Love, which is quite a lovely book as well. This one here is the one with Jesus in the cover. Well, a lot of them have Jesus in the cover. But she says that, it is essential that the individual allow themselves the right to make mistakes, while, that's the big word here, while also recognizing the duty of repair. So it's not about making a mistake and leaving it there. It's about making a mistake, but also recognizing our duty, and she uses the word duty, to repair. There's a right, but there's also a duty attached to it, which surpasses the discomfort imposed by the awareness of the error. When we make a mistake, when we are aware that we made an error, sometimes it brings us some discomfort. And she says that when we start to work towards repair, that discomfort goes away, right? We start to have a different relationship with wrongdoing. And that's why I use the word permissive. She says this is not a permissive attitude towards our new mistakes, but it's the right to be human. It's the right to be, like we have question 115, the right to be ignorant spirits that are still learning, that are still in our journey, in our path to transformation. And she goes on to say, to succeed or to fail in our endeavors, learning through experimentation, which is not always crowned with success. Right? A lot of times, our activities, they're not successful. And that's okay, as long as we are learning through them. We can learn through any experimentation, especially when they don't, end up as we wanted. She says, nevertheless, when one is aware of the mistake with skill and interest, it is possible to turn it into a blessing, because through it, one learns what not to do. So here, we start to change the narrative that we need to punish ourselves when we do something wrong, and instead, it's the ability to be aware of that mistake, obviously recognize that we made a mistake, but then with our skill and with our interest, turn that into a learning opportunity, turn that into a blessing, right? So there's no punishment there. And this is an act of love rather than an act of pride. And this reflection, it helps us to fall into what we call it like the path in the middle. So we're not falling into guilt, which is punishing. We're also not falling into the excuse, which is just raising our arms and being like, yeah, I made a mistake. I always make mistakes. There's nothing to do, right? It's the excuse or the guilt. And this brings us to the path in the middle, right? Which is the path to learn. It's the path to be an apprentice of our lives. And why are we talking about it? Why is it important to talk about it? Well, Danny likes this picture. And why?
I'll give you some of my dog's pictures.
Yes, please do. You know why even talk about this? And Joanna, again, she brings us a lot of ways of how guilt shows up. And hopefully it brings us the importance to talk about it, or why talk about it. In the book, again, right, the existential conflicts, this one, she says that as guilt settles in, it takes control of the emotions and becomes punitive, repressive, and perverse. So we start to lose control of our emotions. And this might not happen, right after we make a mistake.
Yeah.
This can happen as we age. As we get older, we might start to, lose control of our emotions, start to develop fear and anxiety, and not knowing where it comes from. Right? A lot of times it comes from this that has been buried for so long that eventually it starts to show itself. And so if we take that, if we start to see that we are maybe losing control of our emotions, that is it's a great call out, or is a great indication that, well, maybe I should look within and see what's not, how can I say, what's bringing this, right? What's causing it. And it's a great warning for us to look within. And she says, by generating emotional disturbances, it can lead to pathological behaviors and even criminal actions, right? That's how deep it can go as a result of repressed aggression. So why is it important to talk about it? Well, because if we don't talk about it, eventually it will show itself, right? If we won't work through it, eventually it will show itself to us. She goes on to say, the consequences include emotional disturbances, self-pity, physical symptoms like we talked about, issues with drugs and alcohol in a way, or addiction, in a way that in a movement of trying to disconnect from our problems, trying to ignore our problems. It can also lead to depression, relationship difficulties, and among others, right? So you can see it can touch so many aspects of our lives that it really brings us the importance to talk about it and to discuss. We can see here that what used to be an internal conflict that I've been carrying for so long, it starts to become external. Now it starts to affect others as well. It starts to affect our relationships and so on. So it grows, right? And that's I guess that covers the whole idea around the issues that it brings to us. And especially when talking about relationship difficulties, I want to also bring some more from Joanna when she talks about this book here, Jesus e a Atualidade, or Jesus and the Present Day. She says that guilt is a disturbing shadow within the personality, responsible for degrading illnesses and the cause of misfortunes of various kinds. when judging actions it deems incorrect in others, it enacts a projection of its own shadow in the form of self-justification. Lots of words, I understand. So we'll go through it, but this is first time that Joanna talks about guilt as being a shadow, and this is quite used amongst other psychologists and some other people in Spiritism treats guilt as a shadow, in the sense that it's a shadow because it's missing the light of love. And so it's telling us that this, one of the ways that it shows itself is the two last sentences here that says, when judging actions it deems incorrect in others. It's when we start to judge others quite often. You know, everything that we, you know, anyone that we look at, we start judging. And that can be an indication of some sort of guilt within us.
What does doom mean?
Que ela não reconhece, mas caracteriza como incorreta. Então, quando...
It's considered like
Isso, consider.
Okay.
Yes. So yeah, when judging action that it thinks it's incorrect, then it goes directly to judgment, right? Because, again, it is, if you think about guilt like we talked about, it starts with self-judgment, right? So the more and more we're feeding that within us, the more and more we're going to project that onto others. Meaning, the more and more we're going to start judging others. It's another great indication. If we find ourselves in a situation where we're constantly judging others, that could be the reason. It could be some guilt that is still there and hasn't been worked through.
And ourselves as well, I imagine, right?
Oh, absolutely. It starts there, yeah.
Becomes somewhat of a vicious cycle. We'll start doing it to others, then we do it more to ourselves, then we do it more to others, then we do it more to ourselves, and it becomes endless
True.
in a way.
Would there be an example that anyone can cite? Like just
As far as...
this kind of where you're constantly judging. I mean, all of us judge. It's something very difficult to work on.
Mm-hmm.
But someone who has a pattern of judging all the time,
Mhm.
and then, you know, it's guilt, like that stems and that gives a born, you know, you actually go through a lot of misfortunes
Mhm.
because of those guilt. But what is there an example that I can just...
Yeah.
Oh,
And I'll read this one first before giving that example. I think it'll help us understand. In the book Rejoice in God, Jonah says, be careful with guilt, even if it shows itself in disguise, especially in the form of the inferiority complex, the syndrome of distrust, seeking isolation, envy towards the triumphant, and all those who strive for self-improvement. So, if we think about let's pick an example of when I stole something in the past, right? So I did something that I shouldn't have done, but instead of learning from it and trying my best to develop my honesty, I punished myself a lot. And as she's talking about here, punishing ourselves brings us this inferiority complex, right? So now I'm feeling inferior from others. And this is a very uncomfortable feeling, right? Feeling that I'm not good enough. This can drive us to what she's talked about, the projection, which is I'm punishing myself for having stolen something, right? So now I'm going to start heavily judging all those who steal right now. So it's ingrained in us. It's that own punishment that now I project onto someone else, right? So every time I see someone stealing something, I'm going to be fierce in judging. That's because the judgment started within me, and then it just grows and becomes external.
Like maybe it's something you didn't forgive yourself for.
Absolutely, and that's exactly why it shows up.
And then you try.
That's exactly
Keep
why.
judging others. And you actually did that to yourself.
Yeah, because it's such a big burden, and you don't know how to release, and then you just kind of go onto others and kind of project that onto others. Because it's a lot easier to judge others
Yeah.
than to heal ourselves, right? Yeah.
One thing I can, if it's possible, I can add is for taking this example of dishonesty. If you are dishonest in the past, you can probably not create a kind of judgment, but you can also create a lack of confidence in people, of trust in people, because you didn't deserve trust in the past, so you're thinking, oh, so people can be like me, and then you can avoid other relationships or other connections because you cannot trust people because you think you don't deserve trust. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
Yeah.
Makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
I think like it comes a lot from the like our Judaism inheritance that God is someone that punishes us for whatever wrongdoing. So I think it's ingrained
Mm-hmm.
that if we like with our missteps we need punishment.
Mhm.
So if it doesn't come from outside, it comes from within,
Mm-hmm.
right? As opposed to the restorative justice that we talk all the time about. It's just like if you accept your mistakes, you're able to correct it or to restore or to try to do better now. But it's just, and we see that a lot, like how people base their actions or their lives into like, I don't deserve. It's
Mhm.
like a big statement, I don't deserve. And then that like suffering is what will eventually take me to redemption. So it's just like you get into this negative loop that it's all about suffering, right?
Yeah.
In maybe that metaphor cannot apply here, but like in Bahia, in Brazil, we talk about being Gabriela, which is one of the characters of Jorge Amado. That is, eu nasci assim, eu cresci assim, vou morrer assim, or I was born like that, and that's who I am, and then you just keep repeating. It's just like there is no possibility to change when I guess we are invited all the time to change.
Yeah.
So it's exactly the opposite. And when we change and we don't feel guilty, like I think we are way more accepting towards others too.
Absolutely, yeah. It's when we heal here.
Just you release
Right?
it.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for bringing the idea of not feeling deserving, because that is absolutely a side effect of guilt as well. Right? You're punishing yourself so you don't feel like you deserve good relationships. You don't deserve to have prosperity. You don't deserve to have so many other things.
And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy
To the
because then
point.
you're there not deserving.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to the point where you think I'm not deserving of life, right? And then you choose to end it.
But
So,
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I think when you really like realize that we're here to learn, then it's easier to think that you deserve better.
absolutely.
Because if you think that you should be perfect and you do something wrong, of course you're gonna feel guilty, right?
Mhm.
But I think at the time that you really like realize, you can sense that
Mhm.
you were here to learn, then you say, okay, maybe I need another chance because I'm not perfect.
Absolutely.
Maybe
That-
like strive but don't get caught up,
Yeah, yes,
right?
yeah, like just try. You know how to
Strive for it.
for
and-
progress, not
yeah,
perfection,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's key. It's the learning that's key. And now, since the talk is about transforming our guilt, now we've talked about guilt itself, but how about finding healing for it as we know we have it. We know what it can cause to us. Thank you. And here, we can start to think about how guilt can start to be dissolved when we start to reconnect with God. Because as we reconnect with God, we'll start to feel unconditional love. And unconditional love is what's missing. Because when we think about why we fall into this punishment, it's because, again, like you said, we're demanding a perfection that we don't have. Right? So it's like we're saying, I'm only going to love myself once I'm perfect. That's not unconditional love. That is the definition of conditional love. You're putting a condition to love.
Whereas God is showing us unconditional love, that He already loves us with all our good and bad, right? So this would be an exercise to start to realize that even with all the guilt that I carry, even with all the mistakes that I've made, I'm still deserving of love. Peter even says that above all, love each other deeply because it covers a multitude of sins. Right? So also, 2,000 years ago, we already knew that it's love that covers a multitude of sins, not punishment. Right? It's a while ago. Right? And somehow we're still wired to think differently. And Joanna says, again in the book, Jesus in the present day, she says, let's stop being victims of ourselves and become our own psychotherapists. Because guilt eventually leads us to feel a victim, right? We start to have those consequences of guilt, like an illness or anything related to our mental capacities, and we start to feel a victim because we don't know where it's coming from or why it's happening. So she's kind of giving us a little push, saying, stop being a victim and
In a
move.
way, it's very connected to last week's
Okay.
speech, right?
Yeah.
Because it was about forgiveness.
Oh,
But
there
we
you
were
go.
talking about forgiveness towards others.
Oh, okay.
And this is like, if you don't forgive yourself, if you carry on with guilt, how are you able really to forgive other people?
Yes, exactly. And no, that's great to know. I wasn't here.
So, Joanna, I love this passage from her. She says that the healthy habit of self-acceptance of how I am now, today, is liberating. It frees us from the self-critic and the self-punishing. Sorry. So it frees us from the self-critic. Oh, sorry, it's correct. It frees us from the self-critic that is self-punishing. Right? So she's recommending us this idea of self-acceptance. And this is huge. This is huge for many things, including guilt. For a few reasons. First, right, it's when we recognize we did something wrong. The next step would be the self-acceptance. It's accepting not only that we made a mistake, but also accepting, for example, that we have the guilt within us and love us even with that. Because self-acceptance is not something that we can do in the past, right? I'm not going to accept myself, as a small child, innocent, that could do couldn't do wrong. Or it's not self-acceptance for the victor in the future, meaning, when I pass that test, or when I get that job, or when I make that much money, that's when I'll start to accept myself. Self-acceptance only happens in the now, right? And that's why Joanna is telling us that it's a very healthy habit, because it's accepting us today, right? It's not accepting myself when I worked through the guilt in a week, but it's today. So recognizing, that even I have a lot of guilt within me, the first step there is to accept it. It's not even to try to fix it. Because if you go from seeing the guilt and already trying to fix it right away, you're skipping the passage, or you're skipping the step that brings love to the equation. Because you're recognizing, you're saying, oh, you're wrong, I'm going to fix you. I love what Adele says in her song. She says, you can't really fight fire with fire. So you can't really try to fix a mistake with brute force, right? You have to go through that self-acceptance path, Even with that guilt, I'm still deserving of love. Once you bring love to the equation, then the fixing, the repairing, is a lot more straightforward. It's a lot more seamless. It releases the burden that comes with this. And then Joanna says, and this is what Joanna was talking about, the antidote to guilt is forgiveness. So this is where we bring the idea again of self-forgiveness, right? Which is really tied to self-acceptance. She mentions that self-forgiveness helps with our moral maturity because it creates a clear view of responsibility, taking us to careful reflections before taking aggressive and negligent actions. So there's so much to talk about here, but I really like this idea that self-forgiveness helps with our moral maturity, that we become more mature as we learn to forgive ourselves. And also, it creates a clear view of responsibility. So, if we bring this to our talking about guilt, we can see that when we go through a path of forgiveness, of self-forgiveness, we have a clear view, meaning this allows us to clearly see what we did wrong and clearly learn from it. If we stay in the rage or in the anger of guilt, we can't even see what we did wrong clearly. Right? So it's really hard for us to even define a path forward. So we just fall into the easy one, which would be to punish us. So forgiveness, it gives us that clarity that we need to evaluate what was done and to establish a path forward. It also, like you talked about, it brings the moral maturity. And this is also key because it's the moral maturity that allows us to see our mistakes head on. We're not trying to give excuses to the mistakes that we made. We're not trying to hide them under the rug. But we feel mature enough to face them. To see, yeah, I did this. And yeah, it was wrong. But I'm mature enough to face it and to work through it. Whereas guilt is quite the opposite. It's a very childish way to face our mistakes. And as Drew talked about, as we start to develop this within us, it will show itself as being more forgiving towards others. Right? It starts with us, and then eventually it will lead us to others as well. Right? She brings us the idea that it's turning us meeker and humbler in heart, which is something that Jesus told us. And he invited us to come close to him. One of the reasons why he invited us to come close to him is because he said, come to me, you who are suffering, because I am humble and meek in heart. And then by doing this is us basically getting closer and closer to how Jesus behaves, the virtues that he brings. Right? So, what is the alternative then? We talked about guilt, we talked about how to somewhat free ourselves from it. But what's the alternative to guilt? So now, from today on, if I make a mistake, instead of falling into guilt, what should I do? So I don't even have to deal with that. And Joanna, again, in the book Existential Conflicts, she says, there's a healthy guilt that should accompany human actions when they do not align with the standards of balance and ethics. So when we do something wrong. This feeling, however, should be understood as a sense of responsibility. Right? So that's where she starts to change somewhat the word guilt. Saying, the healthy way would be, instead of feeling guilt, it would be to fall into a responsibility idea around that action. And she brings us to things to make it more understandable. She says, if you were to put one against the other, you have perfectionism that leads us to the guilt. But then the other way, the other path, the alternative would be what Marty was talking about, is to bring the apprentice feeling, which is a virtue that we develop. There's even a Buddhist monk called Thich Nhat Hanh. He always refers to the idea of a beginner's mind. Right? He always talks about the idea of facing everything that we do with a beginner's mind, meaning this, right? It's that feeling of being an apprentice, of learning, not judging. And so if we were to see, you know, what this leads, we got perfectionism. When we make a mistake, our pride is basically telling us, no, you're not allowed to make a mistake, right? And why does this cause us trouble? Because this is an utter injustice towards ourselves, right? It's us telling us that you're not allowed to make mistakes, but God created us simple and ignorant, right? It's again going back to the kid learning to walk. You know, the first fall that they have is telling them, no, you're not allowed to fall. Right? That doesn't make sense. It's not fair. It's not just, right? And that leads us to guilt. On the other side, right, the apprentice way would be realizing like we talked about before, it's the right to make mistakes coupled with the duty to repair, right? So it's not just realizing the right, but also realizing the duty. Joanna Gengelis also says in the book, the Conscious Man, she says, you know, the path is not to fall into guilt or to fall into excuse, but to always transform yourself, to always focus on transforming yourself.
Victor,
Yes.
the idea of healthy guilt, would it be appropriate to describe it in the way of remorse? And I know that this is a translation from Portuguese, so I'm not sure if remorse has a different meaning in Portuguese than in English.
Oh, okay.
But just in the sense that if guilt always has a level of blame associated with it, whereas remorse has a sense of apology, of sorriness, with an intention to adjust.
Possibly.
Not remorse, but maybe regret.
Yeah, that would be the right one, I'd say.
Okay.
Because I think the way I understand remorse is more you keep that feeling lingering the way that we understand. Yeah. And regret is like, okay, I understand, I assess, and I did something that was not right. What can I do now to change?
That's interesting because I find it the exact opposite.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
but that's
Yeah.
okay. That's okay. Like,
I thought the same.
Yeah.
What you said.
Yeah.
Because for me, remorse is exactly what you said, and regret is.
yeah.
Because regret is.
It's wallowing in a
Yeah,
sense.
right?
Yes, yes. So in any event, that's okay.
We're talking about the same thing.
We are.
just
We're
using
different words. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that is very interesting because regret in English has a much heavier
Heavier,
Oh, really?
exactly.
meaning than
I thought it was the opposite. So remorse is lighter.
Remorse,
Let's say lighter, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
than regret.
Which is why I said I'm not sure, like the difference in language, how these terms are meant in
All
Portuguese.
the crime thriller movies and series that I have seen when a psychologist or a psychotherapist interviews like that criminal, and they would come back and say he has no remorse, like, you know, like it means there is no repair work available for him or her.
Yeah,
And then regret is just the opposite.
Yeah.
fair enough.
And so if you're talking about the healthy guilt, that's simply, Pasundra, he calls this the awakening of your conscience. It's kind of like that ding that goes, the light that turns on to say, this wasn't correct. There is a better way. And it stops there, right? If you were to keep going on guilt, then you'll lead into all this. But he says that the healthy guilt is just that little ping that kind of tells you, no, this wasn't correct. And then let's try to fix it. And in Heaven and Hell, I won't have time to go through it, but in Heaven and Hell, Kardec talks about the idea of regret. Regret, expiation, and repair. But
That's
So
why I
I
mentioned
see.
as regret
Yeah,
is
yeah.
required.
yes,
Remorse or regret.
yeah,
It is
Yeah.
required because if you
Yeah.
don't do that, you will not go back and learn and say,
Yeah.
oh, I did something.
yeah.
It is required.
I think we all are correct in
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And let me just see one thing here. Okay. Yeah. And well, I'm gonna end because we're at time, but the idea, again, before I go into the last one, the idea that hopefully we got from this is how freeing not going to a guilty path, it's not permissiveness, because we do sometimes have that misconception, right? If I don't punish, I'm being permissive. But there is a way in the middle, right? Which is to clearly, through forgiveness of ourselves, being able to clearly evaluate what we did wrong, and then move into a path of learning from our mistakes. And Jesus himself, again, it's 1,000 years, 2,000 years ago, and we still struggle with guilt. There is that passage with the adulterous woman in the square that probably a lot of us already know, right? And she was brought to the square, and then the Pharisees told Jesus, okay, so what does your law say about an adulterous woman? And then they were ready to stone her. And then he started to write on the sand all of the things that the Pharisees had done wrong, and they started to leave. And then Jesus looked at the lady and said, look around. Did anyone find you guilty? And everyone had gone away. She said, well, actually, no, nobody found me guilty. And then he looks at her and says, well, I too do not find you guilty. Go and sin no more. So he was already saying that he was already freeing ourselves from guilt. No matter what you did, I don't find you guilty. I forgive you. And just go and sin no more. So we've heard a lot of what we need. 2,000 years ago already about the path of love versus guilt. Hopefully we can, start to change those pathways to a more loving one that actually promotes learning, actually promotes transformation and not punishment. So that's most of it. I had some more, but we'll stop here. Any comments or questions?
Great presentation.
If not, thank you guys for making it good. So right now, after we finish our talk, I'll end with a prayer, and then we go to our passes back here, and then invite you all to, be silent with yourselves and reflecting and taking in the good energy that we're surrounded by. So let us start, or let's end with a prayer. Elevating our thoughts and our minds. Connecting with God. And feeling His unconditional love towards us. That comforts, that accepts, that heals. And we ask God that through your love we can learn how to love ourselves. We can learn the path of forgiveness, so we can embark on the path of transformation. And Jesus, we thank you for everything that you've taught us. And may you help us hear your words once again, that I too do not find you guilty. And something that releases us from that feeling and transforms it into love. Thank you, Master, for another day. And may we feel more and more your love that is constantly surrounding us. So be it.